Did it.
Boom. Okay, we're recording now. We're cooking.
Excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, all who are watching this wonderful video, I just wanted to say that I am thrilled to be interviewing my colleague in the ICLS community, Jemima Fregene. That's how you pronounce your last name, right?
Fregene, but it's all good.
Fregene? Oh my goodness. I apologize in advance. But she's fantastic. I had the privilege of reading her thesis, and I really look forward to discussing it further with her. So, Gemma, please tell me. So, how would you define the topic of your thesis, and what initially interested you in pursuing the topic?
So I guess my topic is basically sickle cell anemia at large, but specifically focusing on the past like 20 years of the disease. So kind of like from hydroxyurea FDA approval in 1998 to kind of like present. And it was kind of really annoying because especially towards the end, I kept on finding, oh, the FDA just gave this new orphan drug approval to this new drug, a monoclonal antibody. I'm like, okay, you know what? I can't include like everything, so let's just try to
Right.
be as current as we can be. And it kind of came about, actually it's a funny story, kind of, but not really.
No, I'm ready. Story
So
time.
it was the first day of senior year, and I was like just thinking, I was like, I don't know, maybe I should write a thesis, but maybe I should not. And that was the first day that I went into my thesis advisor's class, and it was like almost like divine intervention. He's like, for any of you seniors in here, yes, you should be writing a thesis. And I was just asking myself that question. So I have kind of always been interested in this disease, but it was kind of hard to narrow it down because I really wanted to focus on an issue that was mainly affecting Black people. So I was also thinking about increased mortality rates among Black mothers. But I don't know, sickle cell anemia, it's something that's a part of my life, kind of being born with sickle cell trait. So I'm like, you know what, this is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So why not?
Wow. I also heard like this is like a quick tangent, but in terms of like sickle cell genes, is it true that people who have the gene for sickle cell but don't necessarily express it, is it true that they have like a slight resistance to malaria? Is that actually a thing?
Yeah, it's actually a thing because then, you know, the mosquitoes can't get all up in your red blood cells if they're sickles, or some of them are sickles. So you are more likely to survive from having malaria than someone who has more normal red blood cells. So, you know, it's the Darwinism, the evolutionary advantage of having this. That's the whole reason why this gene is still around, even though it does cause
I
a
see.
devastating disease.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So, for much of your discussion of hydroxyurea as a sickle cell anemia treatment, you dissect the discrepancies between theory and praxis. So, how would you say that your ICLS coursework prepared you for this type of thinking in your thesis?
So a lot of the ICLS coursework very in theory, sometimes in theory, like going all the way over your head. Like, okay, what's
Relatable.
actually happening here? What are we actually doing in reality? It's like, yes, Foucault, Fanon, they're great, like excellent thinkers, but at the same time, they're very theoretical and whatever. I mean, you can see their influence in praxis. I mean, especially at Columbia. But
Exactly.
yeah, I guess that's how my ICLS coursework kind of prepared me. It's like, okay, all this sounds great, it sounds awesome, but what are we actually doing right now?
Right, exactly. So, something that you said that really stood out to me, like I highlighted it when I read it, like, yes, preach. Anyway, in your thesis, you assert sickle cell anemia is an inherently political disease tied to both race and class. In doing research, what are some of the key things you learned about the politics of health, and how did it influence factors like funding and patient mistrust?
So yeah, honestly, I mean, I've always known that sickle cell mainly affects Black people. I mean, it's it's kind of like, the textbook case, oh, you see a Black kid that's in a lot of pain and it's kind of inexplicable. That's sickle cell, but I don't think people also realize the social side of it. 90% of the patients with sickle cell anemia are also on Medicaid, meaning they're low income. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it comes through in the funding in many ways. I mean, I've written a few history papers now on sickle cell anemia for other classes, actually. This disease was discovered in 1910 by James B. Herrick and E. Irons, even though James
Mm-hmm.
B. Herrick gets all the credit, but he just stole it. And I just want to
Ooh,
put that on record that he
ooh,
got all the credit, but just gotta be shady, kind of like Watson Crick, Rosalind Franklin sort of deal. But anyway,
yeah, right. Game. It can be.
but anyway, and then after its discovery, all these basically, I would basically call them eugenicists, are like researching this
Ooh,
disease, basically
right.
being like, oh, this is like the dysgenic effect of European and African blood mixing, the manifestation of sickle cell anemia, and that's why so many
God.
Black Americans have it. And it basically led to it becoming a very theoretical disease, but at the same time, it's not like they're making the Black community aware of this disease that disproportionately affects them. So
Right.
there's no widespread public knowledge of sickle cell anemia until like 1970, which is
Oh
50
wow, that
years.
is really recent.
Exactly. And then, so Nixon was trying to win points with Black people back in the 70s,
Of
72
course.
year. So he signed the National Sickle Cell Anemia Act into law. So then the Black Panthers could no longer be like, see, sickle cell anemia is like the manifestation of Black genocide or governmental Black genocide. By him like addressing it and putting $4 million of funding into it, they can't say that anymore. But then the disease, it just kind of goes away. There's no Black power movement behind it or anything. And it really relies on this politics of pity that Carolyn Roos talks about in her book, Uncertain Suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have to paint the sickle cell anemia patients as innocent, and these people, they're in pain, but they don't deserve it. And that's how you get your funding. But then you get your funding, but what if your funding really isn't doing anything? I mean,
Yeah.
as I stated in my thesis, hydroxyurea, those first studies on hydroxyurea came out in 1984. So there were some benefits of Nixon funding the disease. I'm not going to deny that. But why
Right.
did it take 20 years for a new therapy to come about at all? Like, or anything that was directly targeted towards sickle cell anemia. While I do advocate for the widespread use of hydroxyurea, that was originally an anti-neoplastic agent. So
Right.
like, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
it is inherently political because it's like your disease to a certain extent, it doesn't matter. Yeah, cystic fibrosis may have a lower prevalence, but that mainly affects white people. So we're going to put a lot of funding into that. We're going to develop a lot of drugs for that and make sure that people have all their options. But sickle cell anemia, that's something that affects poor Black people. There's no money in that, and we don't care about those kind
Mm-hmm.
of people. So yes, health
Mm.
is a very political field, even
Oh
if
yes,
that's
absolutely.
like, oh, we're all equal now. Okay. In theory,
Yeah.
in theory.
Right. Especially, I really appreciated how in your thesis you pressed on the element of patient mistrust because, I mean, it's one thing to actually talk about the implementation of new treatments, but because this disease, as you pointed out in your thesis, like it's predominantly amongst African Americans or Black people, and Black people have been systemically abused by medical research or just like the medical industry at large, like the
Yeah,
probability of that medicine being adopted is like I don't want to be in a science experiment. Thank you.
I don't even remember the man who is a father of gynecology because he makes me so mad, testing on Black women without any anesthesia or anything, even though those drugs were invented by that time. But it's like, oh, Black women don't need pain relief, and that's kind of translated into sickle cell anemia treatment. It's like, oh, these patients are lying about their pain, they just really want some drugs and
Oh
whatever.
yeah, that's another.
Like,
Mm.
if you were in as much pain as they were, you probably would need even more drugs than they need. And what really bothered me when I was reading was this whole concept of, oh, the sickle cell anemia patient shouldn't be dependent on the medical system. They need to learn to be independent. Go home and take your Tylenol and just like take some more Tylenol if you feel bad. It's like, okay, you can only take so much Tylenol 3 before you're just like coked out on codeine and
Right.
like actual medical attention. And it's like people emphasize the pain crises, but at the same time, it's not just about the pain crises. It's about the physical damage that your body is undergoing. Your organs are literally necrosing.
Right.
There are blockages leading to hypoxia, loss of oxygen. When then what does your entire body need? Oxygen. So if you
Right.
need it, you're kind of screwed.
So on that note, so was there anything specific that surprised you as you did your research, or as you wrote your thesis? And is there something that you encountered that changed your trajectory? In your introduction or acknowledgments, you acknowledged that there was a slight shift in your topic, but was that based off of something that you found out in your research, or just based on your personal interests?
Originally, I did want to focus more on like, the first half of sickle cell anemia. So kind of like James B. Herrick to say, or really not even James B. Herrick, but mainly like the 70s, Nixon, Sickle Cell Anemia Control Act and all that other kind of stuff. But then I found out about hydroxyurea and I was like, why is this still to this day something that's underused? That's kind of bananas. It's been like 30 plus years since it's been discovered. So I went to my thesis advisor and I was like, okay, I have it. This is Nixon, this is 70s. And he's like, you literally mentioned the 70s in like one sentence. This is all hydroxyurea. So is that really what you want to focus on? I'm like, you know what? Yeah, maybe that's what I want to focus on. And that's when I found out more information like, oh yeah, there is more targeted drug research towards sickle cell anemia now. So I'm like, can I really even make the claim anymore that this is an ignored disease if we have drugs like Oxbryta, Adakveo, L-glutamine, and other orphan status designated drugs coming out? Literally, there are probably like 5
Like,
that have come out in the past week.
like, yeah, you listed them. And I was like, November 2019. Like, that was a hot month for sickle cell anemia treatments.
Exactly. So part of me was like, can I still make that claim? And I'm like, you know what? I really still can, because these drugs are being kept out of these people's reach. I'm not going to say that I didn't kind of feel bad, because I did talk to drug representatives from some of those companies, and they were very helpful to me. And I'm like, I don't want you to think that I'm bashing your drug or anything, but like $10,000 a month is kind of expensive.
That's crazy.
For $100,000 a year. And yes, I understand you have patient assistance programs, but what if those patients aren't poor enough? Then how are you going to pay for those things?
Right, exactly. So, in what ways would you say that the circumstances caused by the coronavirus pandemic, how did that change your perspective of your thesis topic and or process?
It definitely put a pin in it for a hot minute. I was like, oh my God, I really can't do this right now. This is like, it's not that it's not important anymore, but it's like, God, this is happening now. But I think it made me realize also that even though, yes, what's going on right now, the global pandemic is very important, but that doesn't negate the importance of sickle cell anemia. Like in my acknowledgments, I dedicated it to one of my patients who recently died due to COVID-19, and he had sickle cell anemia. He was honestly a great person, but yeah, it kind of made me realize, just because, it kind of feels like the world is stopping to a certain extent, that doesn't mean that other things cease to matter.
Right, exactly. And just really quickly, so I couldn't help but draw the parallel, as I was reading the thesis, I couldn't help but draw the parallel between how sickle cell anemia, is genetically predisposed to predominantly affect Black people, but now the coronavirus is having the greatest death toll amongst Black people for not necessarily genetic reasons, but for systemic reasons. So obviously that parallel isn't exactly the same, but just sort of showing like the resource disparities there. I couldn't help but think of that.
No, and it's just crazy. Like, what's it called? My boyfriend like is talking to me, and he's like, "Why are Black people dropping dead like flies from coronavirus? This is like crazy, dude." And I'm like, "Bro, are you really
Where
surprised?
have you been?
Are you surprised? This is just like a show of the flawed American health system, and also just like the flaws in the United States in general. Why are people just realizing that there are racial disparities now, that it's an infectious disease instead of something that is more chronic and lifelong?
Mm-hmm.
It's honestly bananas to me. It's like all of this was obvious way before coronavirus. It's just that now that Black people are dying in massive numbers, people are like, "Oh, I didn't realize," and I'm like, you chose not to realize to a certain extent. Not criticizing people at the same time, but this is not new.
Right. Unfortunately, it is not new. So, how would you say that your approaching your thesis differs from what other people have done before on a similar topic?
On a similar topic, I mean, I don't want to be like I'm the first to ever. No, definitely not. But I feel like people mainly focus on the medical system. They don't necessarily look as much as the social underworkings of sickle cell disease. I mean, I didn't go like way into it. I really wanted to, but my thesis advisor is like, "You're trying to do too much. Like, you need to calm down a little bit." But I think a lot of the time, especially in the stuff that I was reading, people get so caught up in the science and the pathophysiology of sickle cell anemia that it's like kind of easy for all of it to go over your head. I think for the most part, I tried to keep it relatively simple and just focus on more of the social dimension rather than the disease itself. I do have that little um, 2 paragraphs at the beginning of the introduction where I'm like, "Oh, hemoglobin, alpha and beta chains, and all that other
That was
stuff."
helpful. Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like after that, I didn't focus as much on the science, and honestly, thank God. Because when I was doing my research, I was like, if I have to do all this science stuff, I'm going to lose my mind. Because it's like, oh, I go into like what CRISPR is and all the other kind of
Oh
stuff.
yeah, I saw that. What did you think of that as like gene editing as a potential treatment mechanism?
I thought it was interesting. That's what everyone seems to think holds the most promise in terms of an accessible cure. Like what I've seen. At the same time, it's very expensive, and also there's a risk of messing everything up. If CRISPR,
That's true.
like people don't really realize, they're like, "But CRISPR is so specific," and da, da, da. I'm like, yeah, it is, but that doesn't mean you can't fudge up.
That's true. And we also still don't fully know how different genes are related to each other. So if we change that one, Lord knows what else is gonna. Yeah.
Exactly. It's just like which one called what was that? Was that 2 years ago that Chinese scientist did the
Oh
thing?
yeah, with the babies.
Yeah. So I hope those babies are all right, but we don't know what's gonna happen to them. Yeah, you may have
Right.
become resistant to HIV, but what are the other implications of doing that?
Mm-hmm. So, as a future medical doctor, would you say that this thesis research has shaped your academic and professional interests? And what, if anything, might you want to further investigate? I know you touched on that a little bit already.
I think it has sort of shaped it. I mean, I'm still not 100% certain what I want to go into. Like after writing this thesis, I'm just like, what if I went into like sickle cell anemia treatment and became a hematologist and specialized in that? That would be great. But I also have other interests like me and like IVF, fertility, OBGYN, that's like my other thing. But that doesn't mean you can't combine interests, because actually people with sickle cell disease who are pregnant have very high risk pregnancies. So they are more predisposed to conditions like preeclampsia, Jesus, gestational diabetes, and all these other sort of diseases. So I think in the future I'd like to go more into that, but I'd also like to go more into sickle cell trait, because sickle cell disease is very studied, but sickle cell trait does not receive as much attention as sickle cell disease. And for the most part, people don't have symptoms of having sickle cell trait. But for example, like me, sometimes my hands and feet will randomly just like swell up for absolutely no reason, and it will be really painful. So it's like, why do some people experience those sort of things, but other people don't? And no one, well, not no one, but most people don't really know what the implications of having sickle cell trait really means.
Right, exactly. And then, last question. What are some of the larger implications of your work, and how does it influence or impact the field in which you are writing?
I think it just shows that people like to put science and medicine in these certain boxes that no one can touch. Science and medicine are messy. Science and medicine are touched by everything. It's touched by racism, it's touched by politics and all these other sort of things. And I think that in terms of training medical schools getting better at not placing medicine and science in the sort of like untouchable box, but at the same time, let's break down the barriers completely. Everything bleeds into each other, and we all need to be conscious citizens of the world in order to make a difference in the world. I'm not saying that we need to eradicate sickle cell anemia or anything, because who knows, it could have its advantages, as we were already discussing. Or the trait could. But at the same time, yeah, everyone just needs to be more aware. And even if those aren't the kind of patients that other medical professionals are dealing with or choosing to deal with, they still need to be aware. And I think I kind of touched on that in my thesis. Like, yeah, we could have those special sickle cell clinics, but then everyone would be like, oh, why don't we just send them all to the special clinic instead of dealing with them directly? And I don't think that's the answer either, because it's about diversity at the end of the day, and being aware of different types of people, different types of diseases. And anyone who is a medical professional should have an interest in anyone who they're treating.
Right. I just wanted to quickly say that I felt like in reading your thesis, I felt like it really captured like the essence of what medicine, literature, and society means as like a field of a study as a major, because like you're right, like science and medicine, it's not like in some random vacuum. Like, and I feel like your thesis, and just having the pleasure of being like one of your classmates, you've been really intentional about seeing the ways in which medicine plays its role in society, and sort of like the nuances of praxis and how that really impacts people and the potentials for improving the system. So I just wanted to say it was an absolute pleasure interviewing you, reading your thesis, and of course we're going to stay in touch in the future as you take on the world and you're incredible and all your medicine things.
Of course, and we will go get tea in Harlem one of these days when it's safe to do so.
When it's safe to do so.
Okay, let me stop recording. Stop.